Now let me tell you something real. The moment you stop talking to him, something changes in his mind. Not because you said something clever, not because you argued better, but because you did something rare. You became quiet, and silence has a sound to it. Silence speaks loud when a person was used to your presence, your energy, your availability. When you stop talking, his mind starts replaying moments he ignored. He starts wondering why the phone isn't lighting up, why the familiar voice isn't there, why the comfort he leaned on suddenly disappeared. That's when thinking begins. When silence enters the room, it doesn't come empty. It comes carrying questions, memories, and unfinished thoughts. The moment you stop talking to him, his mind doesn't relax, it starts working overtime. See, noise keeps people comfortable. Constant messages, constant explanations, constant emotional access make a person feel secure, even lazy. But silence removes the cushion. It forces reflection. And reflection is uncomfortable when someone knows they didn't give their best. When you were talking, he didn't have to think. Your words filled the gaps. Your effort covered his lack of attention. Your patience softened his mistakes. But the day you stopped talking, all that protection disappeared. Now his mind has space, and space is dangerous. In that space, he starts replaying moments he brushed off. He remembers the times you reached out and he delayed, the times you cared and he assumed you always would. Silence turns memories into mirrors, and mirrors don't lie. Silence also removes control. As long as you're talking, he feels in charge of the pace, the direction, the outcome. But when you go quiet, control shifts. Now, he doesn't know what you're thinking. He doesn't know where he stands. And uncertainty messes with the ego. He starts wondering if someone else has your attention, or worse, if you finally chose yourself. That thought alone is enough to keep a person awake at night. What really happens is this silence makes him confront the version of himself he avoided. Without your words to distract him, he has to sit with his actions. He has to face the fact that you didn't disappear because you were weak, but because you were tired. Tired of explaining, tired of hoping, tired of giving more than you received. Silence exposes imbalance, and imbalance creates discomfort. And here's the powerful part. Silence doesn't chase understanding, it demands it. It says, without saying anything, I will not keep speaking to someone who isn't listening. That message lands harder than any argument ever could. Arguments give people something to defend against. Silence gives them nothing but truth. In that quiet, he starts to feel your absence in the smallest things. The lack of good morning messages, the missing support, the empty space where your encouragement used to be. And that's when reflection turns into realization. He understands that your presence was never ordinary. It was valuable, but value is often recognized only after access is removed. Silence also reveals intention. If he truly cared, reflection will push him toward growth, accountability, and action. If he didn't, reflection will turn into avoidance. Either way, silence gives you clarity without saying a word. It filters intentions better than any conversation ever could. So when you stop talking, don't think nothing is happening. A lot is happening. Silence is working on his mind, reshaping his thoughts, forcing him to feel what he ignored. And while he's thinking, you're healing. While he's reflecting, you're reclaiming your peace. That's the real power of silence. When consistency disappears, the mind panics. That's what happens when you stop talking to him after being constant in his life. Consistency creates comfort, and comfort creates blindness. He became used to your messages, your check-ins, your effort, the way you showed up without being asked. Over time, that consistency turned into background noise. Not because it wasn't valuable, but because it was always there. The moment you stop, the routine breaks, and the absence becomes louder than your presence ever was. At first, his mind tries to dismiss it. He tells himself you're just busy, just emotional, just taking time. But as the silence stretches, doubt creeps in. People notice patterns when they change. He starts checking his phone more often, re-rating old conversations, replaying your tone, your patience, your care. The same things he overlooked now feel heavy. Consistency built your value quietly, but its removal exposes just how much you mattered. When you were always available, he didn't have to protect the connection. There was no urgency, no fear of loss. He assumed access was permanent, but silence introduces scarcity, and scarcity forces awareness. Now he understands that connection isn't guaranteed, that attention isn't automatic, that effort has consequences. And this realization doesn't come gently. It hits when he least expects it, in quiet moments late at night when there's nothing to distract him. Silence also changes the story he tells himself. When you were talking, he could blame misunderstandings, timing, stress, or you being too emotional. But silence removes excuses. There's no argument to twist, no words to manipulate, just absence. And absence forces a simple question: why did this stop? That question points back to his behavior, whether he likes it or not. The human mind craves familiarity. When something familiar disappears, it creates a sense of loss even before acceptance arrives. He starts realizing that your consistency was a form of stability. You were the one who checked in, who encouraged him, who made him feel seen. And when that stability vanishes, it creates emotional imbalance. He feels off, unsettled, distracted. Not because you're gone, but because the version of life with you was easier. Meanwhile, your silence sends a message without aggression. It says you are no longer willing to overextend yourself. It shows maturity, not manipulation. Silence isn't revenge, it's self-respect. And self-respect is attractive because it's rare. He begins to see you differently, not as someone always available, but as someone who knows when to withdraw. Consistency made him comfortable, but silence makes him aware. It teaches him that relationships require effort, not assumptions. And whether he responds with growth or withdrawal, the lesson remains. When you stop talking, the mind doesn't forget. It starts paying attention to everything it ignored before. When you stop talking to him, the balance of power quietly shifts, not in a loud, dramatic way, but in a way that unsettles the mind. While you were speaking, explaining, reacting, he felt positioned above the situation. He knew he could respond whenever he wanted, say just enough to keep things going, do the minimum and still have access to you. Your words kept the connection alive even when his effort was inconsistent. The moment you go silent, that dynamic collapses. Silence removes his ability to predict you, and unpredictability creates discomfort. He no longer knows if you're waiting, hoping, or moving on. That uncertainty becomes a mental weight. People are comfortable when they feel in control, and silence strips that control away. Now he's the one guessing. Now he's the one wondering where he stands. That shift alone forces him to think differently about you. Power also shifts because silence shows emotional discipline. It shows that you can feel deeply without acting impulsively. You're no longer reacting to every mood, every delay, every excuse. That restraint signals strength, and strength demands respect, even from someone who once took you for granted. He starts realizing that your emotions were never weakness, they were generosity, and generosity, once withdrawn, feels like a loss. Silence also removes emotional access. When you were talking, he had a window into your thoughts, your feelings, your struggles. He knew where you stood. That access made him comfortable. Without it, he feels shut out, and being shut out forces self-evaluation. He begins to wonder what he did to lose that closeness. The mind hates not knowing, and silence creates unanswered questions that echo. Another thing happens quietly. He starts noticing your absence in his ego. When someone admires you, supports you, believes in you, it feeds the ego even if it's unspoken. When that admiration disappears, something feels missing. He may not label it as missing you, but he feels less validated, less important, less seen. And that absence forces him to recognize the role you played in his emotional world. Silence also reframes your value. When you were always there, your presence felt normal. When you're gone, it feels rare, and rarity increases worth. He begins to understand that not everyone offers patience, loyalty, and care without conditions. Those qualities become visible only when they're no longer available. The shift in power doesn't mean manipulation. It means you stopped over-giving. You stopped negotiating your worth with words. You allowed your actions to speak for you. And actions, especially silence, carry weight. They reveal boundaries without confrontation. So while it may look like nothing is happening on the surface, internally, a reordering takes place. His thoughts reorganize around the absence you created. The power you once gave away through constant communication returns to you the moment you stop talking. When you stop talking to him, something deeper than silence takes over. The emotional spotlight moves away from him and lands back on you. While you were speaking, explaining, checking in, and trying to keep the connection alive, your energy was focused outward. You were investing, adjusting, and accommodating. The moment you stop talking, that energy returns to its source. And even if he doesn't fully understand it, he feels the shift. People get used to being the center of someone's emotional attention. it becomes a quiet privilege. When that attention is removed, it creates an emotional vacuum. He may not miss the conversations right away, but he misses how you made him feel about himself. Supported, chosen, important. And when that feeling fades, the mind starts asking why. Silence doesn't just remove words, it removes validation. That loss is powerful. Another thing silence does is expose emotional dependence. When someone relies on your reactions, your reassurance, or your presence to regulate their emotions, your silence disrupts that balance. He may feel irritated, restless, or unsettled without knowing why. That discomfort is the mind adjusting to the absence of something it leaned on. Silence forces emotional independence, and not everyone is prepared for that. Silence also invites comparison. He begins to notice how different things feel without you. Conversations with others don't land the same. Support feels thinner. Connection feels shallow, not because you were perfect, but because you were real. And real connection leaves a mark. When it's gone, everything else feels less meaningful. That realization doesn't happen instantly, but it builds quietly over time. When you stop talking, you also stop over-explaining. Over-explaining often comes from wanting to be understood at any cost. Silence says you trust that the right person will understand without constant clarification. That shift changes how you're perceived. You're no longer trying to convince him of your worth. You're embodying it, and embodiment is far more powerful than persuasion. Silence removes drama from the equation. Without emotional reactions, arguments lose their fuel. There's nothing to push against. That calm absence can be unsettling because it signals emotional maturity. It shows that you're not interested in chaos, confusion, or half effort anymore. That clarity forces him to confront whether he's capable of meeting you at that level. Another quiet effect of silence is that it creates space for growth. While he's processing your absence, you're rediscovering yourself. You're reclaiming time, focus, and peace. That growth changes your energy, and people feel energy shifts even without words. He may sense that you're no longer waiting, no longer paused. That realization can trigger respect, regret, or both. Silence doesn't beg to be noticed. It simply exists, firm and steady, and in that stillness, truths rise about effort, about value, about what happens when someone stops pouring into a place that stopped pouring back. When you stop talking to him, clarity begins to form without a single explanation. Silence has a way of stripping situations down to their truth. While words can soften reality, justify behavior, or keep hope alive, silence leaves nothing to hide behind. It forces reality to stand as it is, and that reality becomes clear to both of you. He starts to understand that you didn't disappear to get attention. You stepped back because something was missing. Silence reveals effort gaps. When communication stops, the imbalance becomes obvious. Who reaches out? Who initiates? Who values connection enough to protect it? While you were talking, your effort filled the empty spaces. You compensated for his silence with your words. But when you stop, those empty spaces remain exposed. He sees clearly whether he was carrying his share or leaning on yours. This is where boundaries quietly announce themselves. You didn't argue. You didn't threaten to leave. You didn't demand change. You simply stopped giving access to your emotional world. That boundary speaks louder than any rule ever could. It shows you recognize when something is costing you more than it's giving you, and that recognition changes how you see yourself. You stop questioning your worth and start honoring it. Silence also challenges his intentions. If his connection to you was based on convenience, entertainment, or ego, silence breaks it. There's nothing to feed on anymore. But if his interest was real, silence forces him to rise, to reflect, to act. Silence doesn't